This is my true story. I spent my life raising my daughter, giving her everything I had, even when I had nothing left for myself. I thought one day she would be proud to call me her father. But when her wedding came, she looked at me with cold eyes and said, "You're not invited." My heart broke that moment. I had sacrificed everything, yet she erased me. But what she didn't know is that I held her secret photos. And before I tell you what happened, let me ask, where are you watching from and what time is it? And please subscribe. A father's dream is not something born out of wealth or privilege. It comes from long nights of sacrifice, from the quiet hours when everyone else is asleep and you are still working, still pushing, still giving everything you have because of one thought that keeps you alive. My child will live better than I did. That was my only goal in life. From the day my daughter was born, I made myself a promise that no matter how hard it was, no matter how much pain I carried, she would never feel the same hunger, the same fear, or the same struggle that I endured. When she cried as a baby, I rocked her in my arms, whispering that one day she would grow up into a woman with opportunities I could only dream of. When she took her first steps, I told myself I would walk with her until the very end of my days. And as she grew, as school began, I made sacrifices that no one else saw. I skipped meals so she could have books. I wore shoes with holes in them so she could wear new ones. My hands became rough and scarred from endless labor, but I told myself those scars were medals of honor, proof that I was building her future brick by brick. As the years went by, the dream I held closest to my heart was her wedding day. Not because I cared about decorations or music or how many people would attend, but because I wanted the world to see that I had fulfilled my duty. That after all the years of work, I had raised a daughter who was strong, educated, and ready to begin a family of her own. I pictured myself in a suit, old but proud, walking her down the aisle with her arm hooked in mine. I imagined hearing whispers from the guests saying, "That is her father. He gave her everything," and I believed that moment would be the crown of my life. Fathers do not dream of riches for themselves. They dream of honor through their children. That was the only reward I ever asked for. I worked shifts that broke my body. There were winters when the house was so cold that I wrapped her in all the blankets we had, while I slept on the floor with only a thin sheet. There were summers when she wanted to go on school trips, and I picked up extra work even if it meant coming home after midnight, drenched in sweat. My neighbors sometimes laughed, saying I worked like a fool, that no child remembers the sacrifices of a parent. But I didn't believe them. I thought my daughter would understand, if not now, then one day. I thought she would look at me with pride, not pity. The wedding became my symbol of that pride. Every father dreams of seeing his daughter in white, glowing with happiness, starting a new chapter of life. It wasn't just her day, it was mine too. It was supposed to be proof that my struggles were not in vain, that my lonely nights and empty stomachs had built something beautiful. Every time I saw young couples in the park, holding hands and laughing, I told myself one day I would see my daughter like that, and I would know it was worth it. Every time I watched wedding scenes in films or on television, I thought, that will be me one day. I will walk her down the aisle, and I will cry, but they will be tears of joy. I even prepared for it long before she was engaged. I kept one suit folded carefully in my closet, a suit I never wore for anything else. I wanted it to remain clean and untouched until that day came. Whenever I looked at it, I felt a sense of hope, as if it was a promise hanging on a hanger. My daughter didn't know about it. She never saw the way I sometimes took it out, brushed the fabric, and imagined standing beside her as the church doors opened. That vision kept me alive through the darkest years of my life. I believed her wedding would be my proudest moment. Not the money I earned, not the house I paid for, not the nights I endured hunger, but that single walk down the aisle. The truth is, every father sees himself reflected in that moment. He is no longer the young man who dreamed big dreams. He is old, tired, and near the end of his journey. But for one day, the world acknowledges what he gave, what he built, and who he raised. That's why it mattered so much to me. That's why the dream burned so brightly in my heart. I thought nothing could take it away from me. There are moments in life when words cut deeper than any knife. They do not leave scars on your skin, but they carve wounds into your soul that never heal. The day I asked my daughter about her wedding was supposed to be a moment of joy. I waited until we were sitting together, her scrolling on her phone, me gathering the courage in my chest. I asked softly, "So, when is the wedding? What role will I have?" I expected her to smile, maybe laugh and say, "Of course you'll walk me down the aisle, Dad." That was the answer I had rehearsed in my heart for years. But instead, she looked up at me with eyes as cold as stone and said the words that shattered me. "You're not invited. You'll embarrass me." At first, I froze. My ears rang as if the world had gone silent, except for those cruel words echoing again and again in my head. I thought maybe she was joking, that she would laugh and take it back. But there was no laughter. Her tone was sharp, final, and merciless. She had rehearsed that line. She had decided it long before I asked. My daughter, the girl I raised with my blood and sweat, saw me not as a father, but as a burden. She did not want me there, not because there was no room, not because of distance, but because she felt ashamed of me. Ashamed of the man who gave her life. The humiliation burned inside me. I wanted to ask her why. Why was I not good enough? Was it my clothes, my old shoes, my gray hair and wrinkled face? Did she think my presence would stain the perfect image she wanted to show her friends and in-laws? Every thought pierced deeper than the last. I sat in silence, staring at her, waiting for her to soften, to take it back, to realize what she had said. But she didn't. She returned to her phone as if she had brushed away a piece of dirt. To her, my existence was not part of her celebration. To her, I was a shadow she wanted to hide. I cannot explain the pain of being erased by your own child. It is not the same as rejection from strangers or betrayal from friends. This was my blood, my own flesh, looking at me with contempt. It felt as if everything I had lived for was meaningless. I thought of all the years I spent protecting her from shame, all the secrets I kept to preserve her dignity, all the sacrifices I made so she could stand tall. And in return, she pushed me into the dirt, unwilling to even acknowledge me on the most important day of her life. The room grew colder as I sat there. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from despair. I wanted to cry, but the tears refused to come. My heart was too heavy to break into pieces. It felt like a stone sinking deeper into my chest. I thought about her as a child, running into my arms, calling me her hero. How had those moments vanished? How had love turned into shame? I wondered if all those years had been an illusion, if she had ever truly seen me as her father, or if she only saw what I provided, food, money, shelter, without ever valuing the man behind it. Her words haunted me for days. I replayed them in my head as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling. "You're not invited. You'll embarrass me." They became a poison running through my veins, reminding me of my worthlessness in her eyes. I tried to convince myself that maybe she was stressed, maybe she didn't mean it, maybe she would change her mind. But each time I saw her afterward, her distance was clear. She avoided my gaze, avoided the topic, avoided me. My heart, once full of hope, now lived under the shadow of rejection. I kept asking myself, how could she erase me so easily? Did she forget who paid for her education? Who carried her when she was too weak to walk? Who worked double shifts so she could wear the best dress at her prom? Who sold his wedding ring after her mother died so he could pay for her college application fees? Every fatherly sacrifice I had made was now reduced to nothing. To her, I was not a father to be honored, but a stain to be hidden. That was the cold refusal I never expected. It was not just the denial of a seat at a wedding. It was the denial of my very identity as her father. She stripped me of the role I had lived my whole life to fulfill. The dream I had clung to was snatched away, replaced with humiliation. And though I tried to stay silent, to accept it as her choice, something inside me cracked. The silence was not peace anymore. It was suffocation. That night, I sat alone in my small room, staring at the suit that had been waiting for years. It lay neatly folded across my bed, its dark fabric smooth and untouched, prepared for one moment. The moment I would walk my daughter down the aisle. I had imagined myself wearing it proudly, standing tall even with my bent back, guiding her into a new chapter of life. But now, that same suit mocked me. It wasn't a symbol of hope anymore. It was a cruel reminder of what I had lost, of the role I had been stripped of. My daughter's words echoed in my mind. "You'll embarrass me." They weren't just words. They were knives, and each repetition carved deeper wounds into my heart. The room felt colder than ever before. I turned off the light, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I stared into the darkness and remembered everything I had done for her. I remembered the nights when she was little, burning with fever, her small hands clutching mine as I stayed awake beside her bed, whispering prayers until morning. I remembered the mornings when I skipped breakfast so she could have extra milk in her glass, telling her I wasn't hungry even as my stomach twisted. I remembered the afternoons when I rushed from work, sweat dripping down my face, just to catch her school play in time, clapping louder than anyone else in the room. All those sacrifices replayed like a film in my mind, not to boast, not to regret, but because I couldn't understand how a child who had been given so much love could erase her father so easily. The pain grew heavier each time I thought about it. I thought of the day her mother died, how she cried into my chest, and I promised her I would be both father and mother from that day forward. I gave up my own life to make sure she had hers. When she wanted a college education, I sold my wedding ring and pawned family keepsakes just to pay the fees. When she wanted a car, I worked weekends and took night shifts to afford the down payment. I swallowed my pride 1,000 times to make sure she stood taller than me. And yet, despite everything, she had the audacity to say I wasn't good enough to stand by her side at her wedding. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my trembling hands. These were the hands that once carried her, the same hands that once braided her hair clumsily when she was a little girl begging me to try. They were scarred, yes, aged and rough, but they were also proof of love. Every callus was earned in the name of her comfort. Every wrinkle was carved by years of sacrifice. And yet, to her, these hands meant nothing. They embarrassed her. She wanted to hide them from the eyes of her new family, her groom, her friends. I realized then that she didn't just reject me from her wedding, she rejected me from her life. Humiliation became my closest companion. I couldn't look at anyone in the neighborhood without feeling ashamed. What if they found out? What if they whispered that my own daughter didn't want me at her wedding? I walked through the streets with my head down, afraid of the pity or judgment in their eyes. My silence was no longer dignity. It was a prison. Inside, I was screaming at the betrayal, screaming at the injustice. But outside, I stayed quiet, because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. At night, the pain grew unbearable. I stared at that suit again and again, sometimes reaching out to touch it, my fingers trembling. I had kept it for years, believing it was a treasure, but now it felt like a curse. The more I looked at it, the more the tears came, hot, angry tears that burned my cheeks. I wasn't just sad, I was humiliated. To give so much and be told you are nothing is a cruelty no father should endure. The tears eventually stopped, not because the pain went away, but because my body grew numb. Tears turned into silence, and silence hardened into something stronger. It was in that silence that I realized something. Love had turned into shame, and shame had turned into anger. Anger not because she hurt me, but because she erased me. She wanted me gone as if I had never existed, as if my sacrifices were just dust to be swept away. That was the part I couldn't forgive. That was the part I couldn't forget. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind running in endless circles. I wasn't just a man rejected by his daughter. I was a father humiliated by the very child he had given everything for. The pain of that truth was heavier than any burden I had ever carried in my life. And as I closed my eyes, I knew that this wound would not heal with silence. Something inside me had shifted forever. Every father knows things about his child that no one else does. Some are innocent memories: the first word, the first fall, the first time she ran crying into my arms. But some are secrets, things hidden away, never spoken about, because love covers them, protects them, even when it hurts. For years I carried one of those secrets about my daughter. It was not something I discovered by choice, but by accident. Long ago, when she was still in college, I had gone into her room one evening to leave some money on her desk. She wasn't home, and I was about to walk out when I noticed the drawer of her cabinet left slightly open. Out of habit, I pushed it closed, but a stack of envelopes slipped out. Out of curiosity, I picked them up, and that's when I saw them. The photos. They weren't ordinary photos. They were reckless, shameful images, the kind that could ruin reputations in an instant. Pictures with men, nights of parties, moments she thought were private but captured forever on camera. I remember my hands shaking as I looked at them. She was smiling in some, drunk in others, wrapped around people she would never want her future husband, her in-laws, or society to ever know about. My heart broke seeing them, not out of judgment, but out of fear. Fear of what would happen if these images ever came out. Fear of how they could destroy the life she was working to build. That night, I gathered every single one of those photos and put them in a box. I never spoke to her about it. I never confronted her, never shamed her, never made her feel like less of a person. Because that is what fathers do. They shield. They carry the burden so their children can walk freely. I told myself that my silence was an act of love. She didn't need to know I had seen them. She didn't need to live under fear of exposure. I would keep her secret safe, no matter the cost. And for years, I did. I kept those photos hidden, locked away in a place only I knew. Even when she became arrogant, even when she disrespected me in small ways as she grew older, I told myself, she's young. She doesn't know better. Protect her anyway. I thought silence was strength. I thought restraint was love. I thought by keeping her secret, I was protecting her future. But after she told me I wasn't invited to her wedding, after she humiliated me and said I would embarrass her, something inside me shifted. I realized my silence wasn't protecting her anymore. It was protecting her cruelty. She wasn't just living her life. She was building it on lies, on carefully hidden pieces of a past she wanted to erase. And she had the audacity to erase me too. The truth hit me like a hammer. My silence had turned into weakness. By keeping those photos buried, I had allowed her to rise higher while she kicked me lower. I had shielded her from shame while she cast shame onto me. I had guarded her reputation while she destroyed mine as a father. I spent nights thinking about it. I opened the box again and again, staring at the faces in those photos. They were undeniable proof of the person she once was, the person she desperately wanted to hide. I remembered the way she looked at me when she said I wasn't invited, the disgust in her voice, the rejection in her eyes, and with every memory the weight of those photos grew heavier in my hands. It was no longer just about me being a father protecting his daughter. It was about justice. If she thought she could humiliate me, deny me, erase me, then she had forgotten who I was. She had forgotten that I carried the truth she feared most. And if she didn't want me to stand in her wedding, then maybe she didn't deserve to stand in it herself. The secret she hid for years, the secret I had protected at great cost, was about to become the key to my revenge. Not because I wanted to destroy her for the sake of cruelty, but because she needed to learn that actions have consequences, that a father is not just someone you use and discard, but someone who holds the power of truth. I closed the box one last time, but this time, I wasn't putting the photos away. I was preparing to use them. For years, I had been silent. But silence was over. Her secret would no longer stay hidden in my hands. The night I decided to act was one of the hardest of my life. I sat at my table with the box of photos in front of me. My hands rested on the lid, trembling, not because I doubted what I had to do, but because I knew this would change everything. For years, that box had been a silent weight I carried. Every time I looked at it, I told myself, keep it hidden. Protect her. She doesn't need to know you've seen these. But now her words haunted me louder than ever. You're not invited. You'll embarrass me. Those words burned through my heart like fire. She had erased me, humiliated me, and treated me like I was nothing. I realized then that I had spent my life protecting her lies, and she had rewarded me with rejection. I opened the box slowly. The photos spilled out, spreading across the table in a messy trail of her past. Each picture told a story she never wanted told. Faces of men she thought no one would ever know about. Parties where she lost control. Smiles that were not innocent but dangerous, careless, reckless. I stared at them one by one, my chest tightening with each glance. A father isn't supposed to see his daughter like that. And yet, here I was, the only one who knew, the only one who had chosen silence over exposure. Until now. At first, guilt tried to pull me back. A voice whispered in my mind, "You're her father. Fathers protect, fathers forgive. Don't do this." But another voice, louder, colder, answered, "And what did she do for you? Did she protect your dignity? Did she forgive your imperfections?" Number. She erased you. I sat there in silence, listening to both voices argue, until finally the truth settled in. Love without respect is slavery, and I would not be a slave to her cruelty anymore. I began gathering the photos carefully, placing them into an envelope. My fingers pressed against the paper, and I felt the weight of the decision. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about balance. She wanted a perfect life built on lies, while she cast me aside as if I were dirt. I couldn't allow that anymore. If she thought I wasn't worthy of her wedding, then she wasn't worthy of the mask she was wearing. She needed to face the truth, and so did the man she was about to marry. As I sealed the envelope, my mind replayed every moment of sacrifice. The nights I starved, the years I worked with no rest, the dreams I buried for her sake. And now she couldn't even give me a seat at her wedding. My blood boiled as I thought of the suit still hanging in my closet, useless, unwanted. No father should ever sit at home while his daughter gets married, erased as if he doesn't exist. That was the last straw. I knew exactly what I had to do. The groom deserved to know the truth about the woman he was marrying. He deserved to see the side of her she had hidden, and if exposing that truth also shattered her pride, then so be it. I wasn't doing this to ruin her life. She had already chosen that path the moment she humiliated me. I was doing this to make sure she could never again look me in the eyes and think she could erase me without consequence. I placed the envelope on the table and stared at it for a long time. It looked so small, so simple, just a thin package of photos. But I knew it held the power to collapse everything she had built. It could destroy the wedding. It could ruin her reputation. It could bring her lies crashing down in one swift blow. And yet, it also gave me back something I had lost, my dignity. For too long, I had been the silent father, humiliated in the shadows. This envelope was my voice, my truth, my justice. The decision was made. There was no going back. Tomorrow, I would deliver it. Tomorrow, the man who thought he was marrying a perfect bride would learn the truth about her past. And tomorrow, my daughter would realize that when you erase your father from your life, you also erase the shield that once protected you. I sat back in my chair, exhausted but strangely calm. The pain was still there, but it was no longer crushing me. It had turned into something sharper, something stronger. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't just a broken old man cast aside by his own child. I was her father. And fathers, when pushed too far, can strike back in ways no one expects. The morning I chose to deliver the envelope, I woke up before the sun. My body felt heavy, but my heart carried a strange calm. I had spent the night staring at that sealed envelope, knowing it was more than paper and photographs. It was a weapon, not the kind that spilled blood, but the kind that tore illusions apart. I folded my suit neatly and put it back in the closet, realizing I would never wear it for her wedding. Instead, I put on my old jacket, slipped the envelope inside, and stepped out of the house with steps that felt both weak and powerful at the same time. Weak because I was a father on his way to expose his daughter. Powerful because I was finally reclaiming my voice. The walk to the groom's residence was long. Each step echoed with memories. Her first day of school, her graduation, the time she called me the best dad in the world. They replayed like ghosts, trying to stop me, asking me if this was really the path I wanted to take. But behind every soft memory came the shadow of her words. "You'll embarrass me. You're not invited." That rejection burned hotter than love. That humiliation cut deeper than kindness. And so I walked on, holding the envelope close to my chest, like it was part of me. When I finally reached the groom's home, I hesitated for a moment at the gate. He was a young man, polite the few times I had met him. He had shaken my hand once and called me "Sir." I wondered what he truly knew about the woman he was about to marry. Did he know her temper? Her arrogance? Did he know about the secrets buried deep in her past? Or had she painted herself as flawless, erasing every mistake she had made? My breath grew heavier. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about truth. He had the right to know who he was giving his life to. I knocked on the door. My knuckles felt like they were pounding against the very walls of my past. A few seconds later, the door opened, and there he was, the groom, dressed casually, surprised to see me. His eyes widened slightly, but he still smiled out of courtesy. "Sir?" he asked. "Is everything all right?" I didn't waste words. My throat was too dry, my heart too heavy. I pulled the envelope out of my jacket and held it out to him. He looked down at it, then back at me with confusion. I finally spoke, my voice low but steady. "If you are marrying her, you deserve to know who she really is." He didn't move at first. His hand hovered above the envelope like it carried fire. I could see the conflict in his eyes, surprise, worry, maybe even fear. He wanted to ask questions, but I didn't give him the chance. I placed the envelope firmly in his hand, then stepped back. My job wasn't to argue, explain, or defend. My job was only to deliver the truth. As I turned to walk away, he called out, "Wait, what is this?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My chest was too heavy, my emotions too tangled. I kept walking, each step harder than the last, but each one also filled with a strange release. For years, I had carried those photos like a stone tied to my heart. Now that burden had shifted to him, the man who thought he knew everything about his bride. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see his reaction. Whether he opened the envelope immediately or waited until later didn't matter. The truth was in his hands, and nothing could change that. My daughter's mask would soon be shattered, whether she was ready for it or not. As I walked away from the house, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds. It fell across my shoulders, warm but almost mocking. For years, I had been the silent father, the protector, the shield. That morning, I became something else, the judge. My heart still ached. My love for her hadn't vanished, but it had been buried under layers of betrayal. I knew she would see this as a cruel act, a betrayal of her trust. But what trust had she shown me? She had humiliated me, erased me, and left me to rot in silence. My revenge wasn't cruelty. It was balance. The delivery was done. My role was finished. The rest would unfold on its own. As I walked home, I whispered to myself, "She took away my place at her wedding, but I gave the truth its place instead." The day of the wedding arrived like a storm waiting to break. The sky was clear, the hall decorated with flowers, lights, and ribbons, but beneath all the beauty there was a tension I could almost feel from afar. I did not attend, of course. I wasn't invited. But word travels fast in families, and I knew exactly how things would unfold once the truth was revealed. Still, I imagined it all as if I were there, standing in the shadows, watching the collapse of the illusion my daughter had so carefully built. Guests began to arrive early, dressed in their finest clothes, smiling, laughing, and taking photos in front of the grand entrance. The air was filled with chatter and music, with people congratulating one another, waiting for the big moment when the bride and groom would stand together. My daughter stood in her room, wearing her white gown, her hair styled to perfection, her face painted with confidence. She thought the world was about to celebrate her. She thought her mask was safe. But as the hour passed, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. The groom was nowhere to be seen. At first, people dismissed it. Maybe he was delayed by traffic. Maybe there was a last-minute issue. The band kept playing. The guests kept waiting. And my daughter kept rehearsing her smile in the mirror. But soon, the whispers grew louder. Family members exchanged nervous glances. The wedding planner paced nervously. Phones buzzed as calls went unanswered. Still, the groom didn't arrive. Minutes turned into half an hour, then an hour. The chatter that had once been joyful now turned into unease. Guests began to murmur, "Where is he? Did something happen? Why isn't he here yet?" My daughter's smile began to fade. I imagined her clutching the bouquet tighter, her fingers trembling as the truth slowly began to sink in. The man she thought she had secured, the man she believed would complete her perfect image, was gone. The envelope had done its work. I didn't know exactly when he opened it, whether it was the night before or that very morning, but I knew the moment those photos touched his eyes, the illusion was shattered. The woman he thought he loved was not the woman standing at the altar. She was someone else entirely, someone who had hidden her past, someone who had built a castle of lies and expected him to live inside it. And he, faced with the truth, chose to walk away. As the music faltered, the crowd grew restless. Some tried to cover their unease with forced laughter, while others whispered in shock. My daughter must have felt the eyes on her, the weight of suspicion pressing down. She was no longer the glowing bride. She was a woman on the verge of collapse. I imagined her pale face, her trembling lips, her desperate glances at the door that would never open. Every second that passed tore her pride apart, piece by piece. Finally, the silence became unbearable. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. Relatives tried to comfort her, but comfort cannot heal humiliation. Guests began to leave quietly, their eyes filled with questions, their voices low but sharp. Why didn't he show up? Did he find out something? What is she hiding? My daughter, once so confident, stood frozen, her world crumbling before her eyes. The fallout wasn't just the absence of a groom, it was the collapse of her reputation. In one morning, she went from the center of admiration to the center of whispers. Her perfect wedding had become a public disgrace. And though I wasn't there, I could see it all in my mind. The flowers wilting, the music silenced, the laughter turning into rumors, the bride standing alone as her lies unraveled. By the end of the day, there was nothing left. The guests had left in silence, the decorations wasted, the music forgotten. My daughter, who had dreamed of this day for years, now sat in ruins, her pride shattered, her future uncertain. And somewhere inside, she knew why. She knew the truth had come for her. She knew her secret had found its way into the light. For years, I had kept her shielded, but now she had to face the storm alone. The day after the wedding that never happened, the air around our family was different, heavy, silent, like the weight of shame hung in every corner, pressing down on anyone who dared to speak. News of the groom's disappearance spread faster than wildfire. By the time the sun set that evening, everyone in our circle already knew. The ceremony had been called off, the groom had vanished, and my daughter's perfect day had ended in disgrace. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, friends asked cautious questions over the phone, and relatives who had once praised her were suddenly nowhere to be found. Shame doesn't knock gently. It crashes through the front door and sits at the table like an uninvited guest. The wedding decorations had been dismantled in silence. The flowers, once symbols of beauty, lay wilted and discarded in trash bins outside the hall. The chairs sat empty, the aisle unwalked, the altar unused. The photos people had taken that morning, smiling faces, joyful outfits, were now bitter reminders of a celebration that never came. The hall workers whispered among themselves, glancing at my daughter with pity in their eyes. Her white gown, once glowing with pride, now looked like a costume for a play that ended before the curtain rose. At home, she refused to eat. She locked herself in her room, her sobs muffled through the walls. The woman who once looked down on me with arrogance was now broken, crushed under the very weight of her own lies. But even in her tears, she did not come to me. Not to apologize, not to explain, not even to seek comfort. She stayed behind closed doors, refusing to face me, because deep down, she knew. She knew why this had happened. She knew what truth had been unleashed, and she knew who had unleashed it. Her mother's side of the family, the same people who once dismissed me as unimportant, sat in the living room that evening, whispering among themselves. Their faces were pale, their words clipped. None of them dared to look at me directly. They didn't defend her. They didn't scold me. They sat in silence because they understood. They knew she had built her world on lies, and lies eventually collapse. For years they treated me like a shadow, a man to be tolerated but not respected. Now their silence was an acknowledgement that I had been right, that I had been wronged, and that their pride had been destroyed alongside hers. The Groom's family never came back. They didn't call. They didn't send messages. They cut ties instantly, as if the engagement had never existed. In their eyes, my daughter had become a stain, a risk they could not afford. Their son had chosen wisely by walking away, and they had no interest in salvaging a connection with a family tainted by secrets. My daughter's reputation, once the centerpiece of admiration among her peers, was now ruined. The whispers grew louder in the community. Why didn't the groom show up? What did he find out? What is she hiding? I heard those whispers as I walked through the streets. For years I had walked with my head down, humiliated by the way my own daughter treated me. But now, when I heard their voices, I felt no shame. I felt only silence inside me, the silence of justice. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. This wasn't a victory to dance over, it was a reckoning, a balance restored. My daughter, once so proud, so confident, now avoided the outside world. She stopped attending gatherings, stopped answering calls, stopped smiling altogether. She stayed indoors, surrounded by the ruins of a wedding that never was. The woman who once told me I would embarrass her was now the one who lived in embarrassment, and though I felt no joy in her suffering, I could not deny the truth. This was the consequence of her cruelty. This was the cost of erasing a father who had given everything. The family's whispers turned eventually toward me. Some said I should have stopped it, that I should have helped her salvage the wedding. Others said I was too quiet, that perhaps I knew more than I let on. But none of them dared to accuse me directly, because deep in their hearts, they knew the truth was on my side. They knew she had wronged me first. They knew I had carried her secret for years, protecting her from the very storm that finally consumed her. And so the aftermath was not just the cancellation of a wedding, it was the collapse of an image. The destruction of pride, the exposure of lies. My daughter was left alone with the truth she had tried so hard to bury. And me? I was left with silence, a silence that was no longer humiliation, but dignity. It didn't take long before the storm finally came to my door. For days after the wedding collapsed, my daughter stayed locked in her room, ashamed to even step outside. But shame has a way of turning into anger, and anger always looks for someone to blame. One evening, as I sat in my chair staring at the quiet street outside, I heard her footsteps pounding down the hallway. The door to my room burst open, and there she stood, her face red, her hair messy, her eyes wild with fury. She didn't look like a bride anymore. She looked like a wounded animal ready to attack. "You ruined my life!" she screamed, her voice trembling with rage. "You did this to me. You're the reason he left." Her words were sharp, spit flying from her lips, her chest heaving as if she had carried this fire for days, waiting for the moment to unleash it on me. I didn't move. I didn't shout back. I simply looked at her, calm, steady, while she poured her venom over me. She pointed her finger, shaking, her voice cracking as she accused me of betrayal. "You're jealous! You couldn't stand to see me happy. You've always been pathetic, and now you've dragged me down with you." Her words tried to cut me, but they didn't. I had already been cut far deeper by her rejection before the wedding. Nothing she said now could wound me more than, "You're not invited. You'll embarrass me." This, to me, was noise. Noise from a woman who had been stripped of her lies and now stood naked in the truth. When she finally stopped screaming, the silence between us was heavy. Her face twisted with rage, her eyes searching mine for weakness, for guilt, for shame. But she found none. I let the silence stretch, let her feel its weight pressing down on her shoulders. And then, finally, I spoke. My voice was low, steady, and cold. "You denied me as your father. I denied you the chance to live a lie." Her mouth fell open slightly, as if she had expected excuses, apologies, maybe even tears. But I had none left to give her. I had given her everything in life already: my strength, my time, my love, my sacrifices. The only thing I had left was the truth, and I gave it to her without hesitation. Her anger flickered for a moment, replaced by something else: fear. Because in that instant, she realized I was no longer the father she could manipulate, humiliate, or discard. I wasn't the weak old man she thought she could erase from her life. I was the man who had finally stood up and revealed the truth she had buried. She tried to speak again, but her voice cracked. The fire in her eyes turned to water, and for the first time in years, I saw her falter. She stumbled back a step, her hands shaking, her breath uneven. She wanted to call me cruel, wanted to call me heartless. But deep down, she knew the truth. I hadn't betrayed her. She had betrayed me first. I rose slowly from my chair, my joints aching, but my back straight. I walked past her, my steps deliberate, my silence louder than her screams. As I reached the doorway, I stopped and turned to her one last time. "You erased me from your wedding," I said quietly. "But you will never erase me from your life. I will always be your father, and you will always live with the truth." Her tears spilled then, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out of the room, leaving her behind with the ruins of her pride. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the broken man in the corner. I felt like a father again, not because she loved me, not because she respected me, but because I had finally shown her what a father truly is. A father is not a puppet. A father is not a shadow. A father is the one who carries the truth, even when it burns. That confrontation was not loud for me. It was not chaos. For me, it was silence. The silence of dignity. The silence of justice. She could scream. She could cry. She could curse me until her voice broke. But nothing could change the truth. And in that silence, I found peace. When all the shouting was over, when the whispers of the failed wedding began to fade into the background of daily life, I was left with only myself and my thoughts. For the first time in many years, I did not feel like a man carrying shame on his shoulders. I was no longer the father who walked with his head down, embarrassed by the way his own daughter treated him. I was no longer the quiet shadow in the corner, tolerated, but never honored. I was something else now. A man who had faced humiliation, endured heartbreak, and still found the strength to restore his dignity. No, I never walked her down the aisle. I never wore the suit that had hung in my closet for so long. I never felt the pride of holding her arm as music played and people watched. That dream died the moment she told me I would embarrass her, but I walked away with something greater than any aisle could have given me. The knowledge that I did not let myself be erased. She tried to take away my place in her life, but I reclaimed it in the only way I could, by exposing the truth she thought she could bury forever. For years, I lived by silence. I believed that protecting her secrets was an act of love. And maybe once it was. Maybe once it was right to shield her from the consequences of her reckless youth. But there comes a time when silence is no longer love, but weakness, and she mistook my silence for weakness. She thought she could erase me without consequence, that I would simply accept her rejection and fade quietly into the background. She forgot that even the quietest man carries a line he will not let others cross. She crossed that line when she denied me my place as her father. Justice does not always look like revenge. It does not always come with shouting or anger or violence. Sometimes justice is as simple as letting the truth speak louder than lies. I didn't ruin her wedding. She did, the moment she built it on falsehoods. I didn't destroy her reputation. She did, the moment she lived two lives, one for the public and one she thought no one would ever see. All I did was take off the mask she had chosen to wear. People ask me if I regret it. If, late at night, I lie awake wondering if I should have stayed silent, if I should have let her walk into her marriage pretending to be someone she was not. My answer is simple. No. I regret many things in life. Not having more money, not being able to give her everything she ever wanted, not being strong enough to keep her mother alive when illness struck. But I do not regret this, because this was not just about her wedding. This was about me as well. This was about showing her and showing myself that I still had worth, that I still had a voice, that I was still her father. She thought she could humiliate me. She thought she could erase me. But in the end, I walked away with my dignity intact, and she was the one left to face the whispers, the shame, the stares. That is not cruelty. That is justice. I often sit now by my window, watching the world move on. The wedding hall has hosted other celebrations since that day. Other fathers have walked their daughters down the aisle. Other brides have smiled through tears of joy. And I think of what I lost, yes, but I also think of what I gained. I did not walk her into a marriage built on lies. I did not allow her to wear a crown of falsehood while pushing me into the dirt. I chose instead to walk myself out of humiliation and into peace. She rarely speaks to me now. When she does, her words are short, clipped, cold. Perhaps one day she will understand. Perhaps one day she will look back and see that what I did was not betrayal, but a lesson. A painful lesson, yes, but one that only a father could give. Fathers do not always protect with softness. Sometimes they protect with truth. Sometimes the only way to save a child is to let her world collapse, so she finally understands the weight of her actions. I will carry this truth with me until my last breath. She erased me from her wedding, but I erased her mask from her life. And in that balance, I found justice. I may not have walked her down the aisle, but I walked away with my head held high. That, in the end, is all the justice I needed.